Disclaimer, one of the reasons is not the boat, because there's no fucking boat. I just don't see a boat, dude. Alright, I firmly believe that Clive should be alive at the end of the game. In this video, I'll be explaining why I think so with both in-world reasons and fourth-wall reasons, like writing decisions. Some people like to think we just want a happy Disney ending, but it's so much more than that. I made this little doohickey some time ago only discussing Priceless, and I've wanted to revamp it to talk about everything, so let's get to it. First off, just look up the man's sleeve when he drops his hand. His arm is not getting any grayer. At the very least, it's slowing down immensely, which means it's gonna stop soon. We see his forearm have color for way too long if the speed his hand was petrifying at was supposed to carry over to the rest of him. And Sid had a partially petrified arm from the curse too, and that was all. So you can just lose a hand and be fine. But even if all the magic Clive used was enough to fully take him, a lot of people don't seem to get that getting rid of magic would most likely get rid of the curse of using magic too, and I don't think he can be killed by something that doesn't fucking exist anymore. Additionally, take his dialogue into consideration. He just hopes Jill is moongazing with him. Quite the underwhelming choice of quote-unquote last words. After all the promising he did that he'd come back to her, I think if he really thought he were dying, he'd make some attempt at an apology when addressing Jill here. I mean, I don't fuck, but something like, "Sorry Jill, at least the moon is beautiful on this night," some sappy shit like that, but no, all we get is, "Yo, look at the moon." That's it. And to me, the biggest reason why he survives here is that it just makes the most narrative sense. This ain't a Zack Fair situation where he's just the nicest guy and that's that. It is set up very early on that Clive's martyr-like tendencies are his worst flaw as a character and is something he needs to get past. The story doesn't gas him up for a sacrificial death like with Noctis in Final Fantasy XV. Clive's martyrdom is treated as an issue. Everyone around Clive tells him he's gotta fucking chill with how far he's willing to go to save others and that he has to look out for himself. His whole character arc is learning to accept and love himself, learning that he has meaning for living beyond the sword, learning that it's okay to save himself now and again, and maybe even let others save him for a change. Sid tells him to, Jill begs him to, Joshua slugs him a good one over it. This Redditor encapsulates this point perfectly. For Clive to never hear out or listen to those who care about him and acknowledge what they wish for him the entire game is grossly unsatisfying and let alone just doesn't sound like the character. Some people say it is in character for him to sacrifice himself like he's always done, as if his character arc wasn't about changing that part of himself. I mean, it's even Joshua's dying wish that Clive ease the fuck up and return to Jill. And that brings me to my next reason why I think Clive is alive. I think Joshua is dead. I think whatever Clive did here just ended up unbranding his corpse from Ultima's mark. Some small last mercy. As for any visual signs that he's actually revived now, we get nothing. No flinch, no breath, ain't shit. And even despite all that, you're gonna tell me that Joshua did not get absolutely cremated in this? Of course, Clive's the exception because he's the one making the fucking explosion. He doesn't burn his hand whenever he casts magic. And you know what the cherry on top for this one is? If Joshua survived, this would be his second fake out. Like, come on, dude, relax. And really, Joshua being dead is the only evidence you need in order to think that Clive is alive. Case and point, this book exists. If Joshua is dead and this book is a thing, then Clive is alive. In the A Tale to Tell side quest, Harpocrates gives Clive a feather and tells him he should chronicle his adventures once all is said and done. Well, ta-da, this is probably it. Being widely known as Sid the Outlaw, Clive is no stranger to taking someone's name to honor them in completing their work. And after looking at his findings regarding Ultima, Harpocrates said Joshua would make a fine historian. I don't think anyone else would publish the book under Joshua's name. And honestly, if Clive were dead and Joshua wrote the book, he might have even published it under Clive's name. It just seems like something they would both do for each other. Also, Clive is the only one who knows the full story, since Joshua was definitively dead for the final battle. Now onto the title. We all know everyone went nuts when Clive said the thing.
The only fantasy here is yours, and we shall be its final witness.
I don't think anyone could coincidentally come up with Final Fantasy as a fitting title for the book, especially with how Clive only ended up saying it himself as a response to something Ultima said after many strings of dialogue in a private conversation. And for those who say that Joshua overheard this, he was dead, dude. Even if you think Joshua lived, he was dead at that time. Not dying. Dead. Clive's mourning as he holds him is a very clear indicator of that. And I think the title being Final Fantasy would be nothing more than a simple fourth wall nod for fans if only Clive had not done the name drop. Because it gives a clear reason as to why the book would be named that. And only he knows that reason. And to top it off, Clive is the narrator for the beginning and the end of the game. Most likely with the lines that open and close the book. And by the way, the end narration takes place after he supposedly died. I wonder what that could mean. Alright, let's go over to the Jill side of things now. So Metia is a piece of shit that makes things complicated to explain out loud. So Jill jumps to the conclusion that Clive is dead based on Metia acting up over something. Some believe the star disappears basically as a fuck you to Jill's wish that Clive return to her safely. But others say it disappears after having finally fulfilled her original wish and that it didn't grant that when she thought it did, like she says at the Murdoch's house. Some say that since Clive was never in any truly life-threatening danger, the wish wouldn't have been granted then, so Jill is mistaken when she says that her wish was granted, because it couldn't have been granted. But now it could be granted, and therefore now is granted. And it disappears after that because she won't need it again. Clive is safe now. Now, everything I just said could be what actually happens, or just be what is symbolically represented by what happens when you bring in the idea that Metia could be a construct of Ultima. I don't know if it actually is or not. I can't find a clear answer anywhere. But if Metia is Ultima's creation, then the literal reason it disappears is simply because Clive destroyed Origin and all things magic, and Jill just misinterprets this as meaning Clive is dead, hence her crying. And also, others say she broke down crying because she felt the disappearance of Clive's icon, which would mean that he's dead. But of fucking course she would feel his icon's disappearance. Icons don't fucking exist anymore! Alright, next thing to talk about, Torgal. Some say that he could be howling in mourning of Clive, which is a real thing wolves do, but others say it could be a rousing call to be used as a waypoint, which is also a thing that real wolves do. I lean more towards the idea that Torgal is, you guessed it, calling Clive home. But it's not just about what he does here, it's what he doesn't do. He doesn't continuously howl a number of times, he just howls twice. I think he'd be in much more distress if he thought bro was dead. Also, he is silent after the 2 howls, not even any whimpering. He was whimpering when Sid was dying, but after his 2 howls here, he's just done. He just sits there. And look at his face. The way he's lightly shifting his gaze out to the horizon indicates that he's feeling expectant. He's awaiting Clive, because Clive is not dead, at least to Torgal. And now, finally, the sunrise, and Jill's reaction. In the priceless side quest, when Clive takes Jill to the patch of snow daisies he and Joshua found, she tells him that long ago she had a personal revelation of sorts, where no matter how terrible the night, dawn would always come, and that Clive would always come. And she affirms him that he has come to her again and again. This just about absolutely implies that the sunrise in the ending symbolizes Clive's survival and coming return. Viewing the ending with this idea in mind is the only way it reasonably makes sense to me that Jill stopped crying when the sun came up. Some people say it's because the dawn is Clive's gift to the world and to her, and Clive lives on in Jill's heart, and the dawn both reminds her of that and is a testament to that. But, well, for one, I don't think Torgal was really capable of appreciating the poetic beauty of that, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. I don't know about you, but if I received a final gift from the love of my life after hearing of their passing, I would break down even more. Jill stops crying and almost smiles. She must be starting to think that Clive is actually okay. And from a writing standpoint, that translates to Clive is actually okay. There is no way he isn't. A writer would not give a character hope about something and leave it at that and end the story without that hope being fucking valid. Like Inception, for instance. The totem starts to stutter and it ends. Of fucking course he's in reality now. Or look at Kimi no Na wa. Taki and Mitsuha hope each remembers the other and it ends. Of fucking course they remember and start fucking each other. Jill sees Dawn and hopes Clive is coming back. Of fucking course Clive is coming back. You see what I'm fucking doing here? And side note to everybody who says they want to cry and wallow in despair whenever they hear Kenshi Yonezu's moon gazing, the lyrics are literally, like the actual definition of literally, about a lover's return. Relax, guys. So basically, I think Jill thought Metia done goofed on her and she gets real fucking scared, but then the sun rises and Dawn meeting what it means to her, she reassesses the situation and probably realizes that she doesn't know shit yet, like she hasn't seen a body or anything. So she resumes to hoping Clive could actually be on his way to her right now. And I feel that means he is on his way to her right now. Now, 2 more narrative things I want to discuss. Sid wanted to make a world where people could die on their own terms, but Clive wanted to make one where people could also live on their own terms. Clive had practically no time to be living for himself for the entire game, since the entire game was him getting to that dream world. He hasn't lived on his own terms yet. Dying on one's own terms and nothing more was Sid's end goal, and he achieved that. If Clive dies fighting for the world free of magic and oppression and never gets the chance to live in it, find meaning, and ultimately find happiness, his arc is effectively left unfinished. And to disregard that for a sad ending which makes you go boo-hoo everywhere is really shallow and just cheap writing, which is not in line with the rest of the game. And lastly, for the ending to be a farewell to fate, Clive was fated to kill the murderer at Phoenix Gate or die trying, and he escaped that fate by doing neither of those things. Then he was fated to become Ultima's vessel or die fighting it. If he escaped his fate just as he promised Jill, and just as the ending says, well, you can finish the puzzle. But I could be wrong. Remember, we don't actually know shit. Maybe the curse slowed down, but didn't stop. Maybe Joshua did channel his inner George Lucas when writing Clive vs. Ultima. Maybe Jill did stop crying just because Clive is only coming back in spirit through the dawn. Maybe Dion is alive because dragoons don't take fall damage. We barely know a fucking thing. All I know for certain is that I think Clive not only can be alive, but should be alive. And if it becomes at all confirmed that he isn't, I don't fucking like the ending. Because to me, that means the writing fumbled at the finish line for a cheap attempt at wrenching hearts. The game is very on the nose in how it presents self-sacrifice not as something heroic, but as something that renders those it leaves behind feeling like shit. And I see no reason for the story to not hold true to this interpretation. For the last thing we see Clive do to be what the story categorizes as a borderline disservice to loved ones is just a total punch in the gut and a kick in the dick. Aside from mirroring Sid's death, which it doesn't, by the way. Sid doesn't die alone or from the curse. What are the thematic ramifications of Clive's death here? Shit happens? Because the game spent loads of time making a point out of that, right? And I'm sick of seeing in media this post-conflict optimism somehow overriding the grieving process. Like, oh, the world's a better place now thanks to his sacrifice, so it was worth it. And I'm considerably less sad now, even enough to stop crying 1 fucking minute after starting to think he's dead. And the dead wanting you to move on does not actually make moving on that much easier. That's not how that works. Especially 1 fucking minute after thinking he's dead. Yes, as long as the game is technically open-ended, you are allowed to have your own interpretation, just as I am allowed to vehemently disagree with you. Alright, bye. When you are going, you don't hear me say, please, the